The Philadelphia 76ers have begun rolling out their introductory press conference for the new free agents and additions to this Sixers team. While we're still waiting on the Paul George press conference at the point of this recording this video, we did get some noteworthy comments from a number of new players, most specifically Caleb Martin being the headliner for this video here. And he said something really interesting in his interview. There was a lot to discuss with Caleb Martin. There's obviously some backstory, and I dropped another video speaking on how he took less money to come to Philadelphia, rejecting a 5-year, $65 million from the Heat just to sign a 4-year, $32 million for the Sixers, essentially going from $13 million to $8 million per season, with a couple other details around the edges as far as a player option in the end and other things that are worth noting there. But Martin spoke a little bit about all this, and what I thought was the most notable quote, perhaps hinting at the Sixers' future, was this one right here. Quote, "Kyle Lowry is like one of my big brothers right now. Anywhere Kyle fits, I know I'll fit. He loves it here. He loves playing for Nick, so I think I'll fit in for sure." Caleb Martin on how he'll fit in Nick Nurse's system. So obviously we know the ties between Nick Nurse and Kyle Lowry, that when Nurse first took over as head coach and won a championship with the Toronto Raptors, that Kyle Lowry was much more in his prime and a key part of that team. Lowry is certainly at the twilight years of his career, but he did have his Philadelphia homecoming, playing for this team and playing a far bigger piece of this team than most expected last year. And he officially remains unretired, and the Sixers still have roster spots. Now, we know the financial constraints that the Sixers are currently facing, that they're basically dealing with veterans minimums, but at this point in his career, that feels about right for Kyle Lowry. Now, as far as the other options for Lowry, Gerald Bourget, as I believe how you say this man's name, who's a reporter of the Phoenix Suns, he reports that the Suns are still working on re-signing Josh Okogie. A few teams want him, but Phoenix is confident they'll be able to keep him. And Kyle Lowry is still in play, as both sides are still talking, but indicates that he may wind up back in Philly. I do think that is the most likely outcome. We're seeing very much in very clear display in this free agency period with this new CBA under consideration that essentially the middle class of the NBA has more or less disappeared, that there's very few players signing Caleb Martin like deals for 4 years, $32 million. There's very few of, the $15 to $20 million per year guys. It's basically max contracts and then either mid-level exceptions, veterans minimums, or closer from the bargain bin type opportunities there. So I think Lowry's going to be a guy who is going to be on the outside looking in, particularly at this point in his career. Now, I did want to acknowledge what Lowry brought to the table last year. Both things can be true here. And for starters, we'll look at what his stats, what he brought to the table here. For Kyle Lowry, 8.1 points per game, 3.2 rebounds, 4.2 assists, 1 steal per game, 43.2% from the field, and 39.2% from three. He also shot 45.2% from the corner and 80.6% of his three-pointers being assisted. 38 years old at the ripe age and still showing the Kyle Lowry-like things, whether it's taking a charge, drawing a foul. He's still got those annoying little traits that I think are important to basketball teams and certainly fit the identity that the Sixers are leaning into there. Now, both of these things can be true. That Kyle Lowry's role on the Sixers team was far bigger than it should have been last year, and he still can be productive in a more reduced role. Now, in fairness to Kyle and the Sixers here, is this was not the expected role that Lowry took on when he came to Philadelphia. That if there was no DeAnthony Melton injury, he would not be starting or playing the amount of minutes that was the case for the Sixers team. And to dive into what specifically that was, in the regular season, he played 23 games for the Sixers team, 28.4 minutes per game, 8 points, 4.6 assists, 2.4 defensive rebounds, 2.8 rebounds overall. And then take a look at the playoff stats here. Started all 6 games for the Sixers team, 29.2 minutes per game, and averaged 7 points, 4 assists, 1 steal, 3.5 rebounds. Shot the ball fairly well, just 33.3% from three, and actually struggled from the field overall. But he certainly had his moments where you felt his impact throughout the flow of the game. But I do think in a more reduced role, that there is a chance where Kyle Lowry can still be an effective player. I'm not saying this is a guy who should start a Sixers game or any other NBA game at this point in his career. He's absolutely a bench option. But when you have Tyrese Maxey and even a guy like Jared McCain, I think would be an excellent player for Lowry to be able to take under his wing. You see some similarities in their game already from what we've seen at Summer League, the way that McCain likes to drive physical, have a guy attached to his hip, his feel for the game overall, his kind of defensive instincts and spatial awareness there. There's a lot of similarities in what we saw from a younger Kyle Lowry to what I'm seeing in this version of Jared McCain there. Now, there's also a larger point that I thought was brought on by Caleb Martin during this press conference, and it's a lot about this changing identity within the Sixers organization. Now, we can see this in a larger scale on full display, such as giving Maxey that moment where they handed him the max contract, showed their appreciation, all the different messages that were shared his way, in one of the cooler videos that I've seen from any sports franchise. You also just feel it by the way each of these guys responded. That Andre Drummond saying that Philadelphia likes home, Kelly Oubre saying how he fell in love with basketball again, playing here in Philadelphia, and saying that he passed up on more money in order to stay. Caleb Martin turning down more money in Miami, which frankly has had more playoff success than this era of Sixers basketball, and Martin has been a driving reason why. He did that to come to Philadelphia. And I thought it was especially interesting to see a little bit of Martin's feel on Oubre. Oubre also, by the way, squashed any sort of beef with Paul George by speaking about how excited he is. We know that those two have had their dust-ups over the year, but I do like to see that. But Martin also mentioned Oubre himself, saying that, quote, Kelly's a really good dude. From the times I've been around him, it's like I've known him for years. Easygoing dude, but he's about his business. He's going to be a big piece of what we're trying to do. And Kelly Oubre also humbly referred to himself as the third Martin triplet. That also, with shout out to Cody Martin of the Charlotte Hornets, was also in attendance at the press conference to welcome Caleb Martin, which I did think was very cool there. And cool that there is the relationship already with Kelly Oubre and these players. This is going to be the demon time guys. These are going to be the pot stirrers, the people getting under opponent's skin. It's going to be Caleb Martin and Kelly Oubre. So I like that there's already a little bit of familiarity there. And to dive in what Martin can bring from a basketball perspective, these stats don't tell the whole story, but he is a 10-point per game scorer, 4.4 rebounds, 2.2 assists per game, shots 43.1% from the field last year, 34.9% from three, just 32.9% from the corner. But the biggest note about him is he is a big game riser. He's a guy that's a gamer. He's had his biggest moments in the playoffs against the Boston Celtics, which is noteworthy here and something that the Sixers absolutely should be looking for. And that's also a little bit more of a down shooting year over his career. He has shot over 40% in a season before, and I do think with the spacing that we will see around Joel Embiid, with Tyrese Maxey, and with Paul George, that there's going to be plenty of great catch-and-shoot looks for Caleb Martin, far better than the quality of look he was getting down in Miami here. But I did want to circle back to this point about this changing culture within the Sixers team. That is a big deal and something I don't want to go unrecognized here. That for years, we've kind of escaped this stench of losing that stuck around with the Sixers forever. And they obviously still have more to overcome it. And the only way to truly do that is to put a championship trophy on the shelf. But it does feel like there's a new vibe brought on within the Sixers organization. And as much as he has taken his lumps over periods of time for this Sixers team, Daryl Morey has to earn the credit for that one. That he has stuck through it. He has gradually just gotten rid of the pieces of this organization that needed to go. The Tobias Harris, the Al Horfords, the Ben Simmons, to finally build a roster that both from an on-court perspective, we expect to be true championship contender, and from a mentality and outlook perspective, an attitude perspective, these are all guys that fit. That there's more of a good vibe around the Sixers team than just about any that I can remember in years past. That I do think Daryl Morey has done his due diligence. That it's no coincidence that the players that he's drafted and the guys that he's signed all hold similar characteristics for being the hardest worker. That was the number one thing I heard about both Jared McCain and Adem Bona in this year's draft, and those, of course, were their first and second round picks who are already signed to deals. And by the way, it is not the norm that second round picks just get handed standard NBA contracts, so they obviously saw something in Adem Bona, and frankly, we're seeing it in full display in Summer League, is that he is a motor that is off the charts, and a guy that plays a little bit more in a controlled pace, less chaos than there was brought on with Paul Reed there. So that works from a standpoint of, manipulating the finances, that you can release that $7.7 million contract of Paul Reed, which has already been done, and then adding a rookie deal that is far cheaper than that from a salary cap perspective for a player that might ultimately turn out to be more effective than Paul Reed when things are said and done. But the bigger story here is both those guys had the personality of we're hard workers, we're the first one in the gym, the last one to leave, and that's something that's infectious to teammates. We saw that with Tyrese Maxey, who was the first choice of Daryl Morey when he first took over here. It's clear that there is being more attention paid to the types of players that are representing this organization, which I love to see. And especially if you want to compare around the league, when you see teams like the Clippers or the Charlotte Hornets taking chances on guys with more than questionable characteristics for stuff outside the court, I like that the Sixers are buying into this. Good vibes, good people that want to wear their heart on their sleeve and will be embraced by Philadelphia, and I do think that results will follow. Obviously, talent is something that I think is more important and will win out, but when you can get this combination of guys that are talented with still this level of effort and this kind of infectious personality that we're seeing, players like Jared McCain and Kelly Oubre and Caleb Martin who have a unique personality and wear their heart on their sleeve, I think that's a great thing right there. Even Tyrese Maxey with the friendliness, the smile, and everything that he brings to the table, it's not like what you just picture an NBA player, and I think it's cool that the Sixers aren't embracing that. So shout out to Daryl Morey for beginning to change the culture there. Welcome to Philadelphia, Caleb Martin, and maybe welcome back to Philadelphia with Kyle Lowry there. Even with the flaws that he has at this point and clearly past having a ton left in the tank, he's still a guy that I think would be an excellent influence on the locker room, a guy that is a leader who has that championship pedigree, and frankly, still had far more left in the tank than I expected to be the case this year. So no, I don't want him being a starting guard on any playoff team for the Sixers, but if he wants to come in and give a couple minutes off the bench and show what a Nick Nurse offense is truly supposed to look like, so be it. Sign me up for that. So we will see how things happen from there, but I do think, especially following this comment from Caleb Martin, that I do expect Kyle Lowry to be back on this Sixers roster next year. Still a couple more spots available on veterans minimum. I still think Marcus Morris is coming back as well, and a couple other pieces to fill out from there. So keep it locked to Sixers Digest. We will have videos coming out on each of those moves as they happen, so make sure to stay tapped in. The best way to do that is by smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Also, make sure you're dropping a like in any comments that you have below, and I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.